Uh, Moving along, we'll go straight into our keynote speaker. And our keynote speaker this morning is Mr. Carter Smith. Carter serves as the Executive Director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, position he has held since 2008. Prior to joining TPWD, Carter worked in conservation for the Katy Prairie Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy of Texas, where he served as a Texas State Director. Carter is very well liked and respected by TPWD staff. Carter, good morning and welcome, and please take it away.
Great, Freud, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is that coming through?
Yes, sir, it is.
Great. Well, listen, thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. I'm delighted to be with all of you. Freud, I'll confess just a modicum of trepidation about being asked to give this talk this morning, and I want to quickly assure you it has nothing to do with you. But I had a delightful call from your esteemed and venerable co-chair, Mr. Brewer, earlier this week. And the first 10 minutes of it were right out of a Saturday Night Live skit as Clay was trying to toggle unsuccessfully between his Bluetooth and his phone. And the conversation went something along the lines of, can you hear me? Can you hear me? How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm going to pull up. Can you hear me? Oh, there's a deer. Okay, you got me? At some point, I think it was, and I'm not sure why I stayed on the call, except out of just sort of morbid curiosity, he reached some sort of harmonious equilibrium with his cell phone. And I got around to asking him where he was going and what in the world he was doing. And he allowed as to how he was going out to meet you and I think Dr. Harvison, and he was going to get ready for the council meeting. And I asked him what, pray tell, his role was going to be. And I almost fell out of my chair when he somewhat proudly, and I thought rather boldly, given the circumstances of the last few minutes, told me that he was the designated AV IT guy. And I wrote this down because I was so impressed. The Zoom master for the Desert Bighorn Council, a distinction that I don't think in his 30 plus years in sheep conservation he's ever held before. And so I really delighted to be part of this very seminal moment in Clay's long and distinguished career. Freud, I really am thrilled to be with you to give this virtual welcome to everybody. Clearly, as Freud said, we wish all of you were out in our part of God's country, a place in our state, as I know it is in your home ground that's distinguished in large part, really, by the presence or proximity to bighorn sheep. And we dearly wish that we could host you out in Alpine and West Texas and hope that all of you will come back soon. I was looking at the date, Freud and Clay, on the establishment of the council going back to the 50s and reflecting on the fact that we've been a proud member of this council since its inception. And, some of the earliest biologists in our state that worked on bighorn sheep recovery, restoration, and translocation, Tommy Haley and Jack Kilpatrick and others were part of the seminal group that were involved in helping to move this council forward. And so it gives me a lot of pride to see how far it's come since that time. And as we think about, clearly the work on a transboundary species of such importance like bighorns that don't care one whit whether or not they're in West Texas or Mexico or New Mexico or some other part of the range, it goes without saying that no state is an island. And we have benefited immensely from the contributions and insights and science and counsel and assistance, and in some cases, sheep themselves to help with our bighorn program here in Texas. And so we are deeply grateful to all of you throughout the range and the members of the council for everything that you provide, and we have an opportunity to learn from and share with. I think it's also important, and I'd be remiss, Freud, if I also just didn't acknowledge the huge conservation successes that this body has achieved through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the decades. And when we think about our desert Southwest and our Sky Islands and, what so many of us like to fondly think of our wild things and wild places, we know that they're a lot wilder and they're a lot better because of the fact that they're bighorn sheep in them. And that's due in no small part to all of the professionals that are part of this council and get up every morning, every day, working to help put sheep back on the mountain. And I'm very proud of your work. it also, I think, goes without saying that those successes are hard earned, and that there are threats aplenty that all of you in your respective jurisdictions have to contend with, just like we have to in ours. And whether that's predation issues or value conflicts over public lands or recalcitrant private landowners or predation related issues or disease or land use conflicts or land use changes or transportation issues or climate related concerns. There are an abundance of issues that all of you are having to work through to help pull the sled in favor and in furtherance of bighorn sheep conservation. And I'll also say that in the realm of wildlife, there's no politics quite like sheep politics. And in the spirit, perhaps, of a seasonally appropriate metaphor, and to borrow a line from Robert Penn Warren, many times you have to carry out your work in a climate and environment that is not exactly like Easter week in a nunnery, and with plenty of people that are happy to share their feedback, sometimes very caustically, about what you or we or us can be doing differently or better. And I know that can be hard on all of us as professionals as we stay focused on, again, our goal of helping to restore this magnificent, iconic animal back to its rightful place in this landscape. I also can't help but reflect on the fact that these jobs also come with considerable personal risk and sacrifice. And that reminder was very poignantly and abruptly driven home to us on a date, the 8th of August of 2020, that will remain forever and indelibly etched in the memories of all of us in Texas, when we lost three of our absolute finest colleagues, Brandon White and Dewey Stockbridge and Dr. Bob Dittmar, to a helicopter crash in the Black Gap Wildlife Management Area while conducting sheep surveys in that August. Brandon was a native son of Spur. He was a fish and wildlife technician that worked for the department, had left a successful business that he had established there in Alpine after being recruited by Billy Tarrant to come pursue his dream job working at Elephant Mountain as our technician. He was the consummate technician, somebody that could fix anything, do anything, affable, outgoing, personable, a friend to all, somebody that everybody turned to when they needed help. His boss, who also was in that helicopter, Dewey Stockbridge, or as my wife for most of her life insisted on calling him, Little Dewey Stockbridge. She showed sheep and steers with Dewey's cousin, and when Dewey, a few years younger than her, would trail around in the show pens, they called him Little Dewey. And even as Dewey got closer to 40 than 30, she still persisted on calling him Little Dewey Stockbridge. And while Dewey may have been small in stature, he was big in spirit. And he was big in his love of sheep and all of the places that they occupied. And he was quiet and steady and thoughtful. And he didn't say much, but when he did, you damn sure listened. And he was our manager of our Elephant Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Bob Dittmar, or Dr. Bob, as so many of us fondly call him, was a rancher's son. He was a country vet. He left his practice there in the hill country in Kerrville to become the Parks and Wildlife in the state of Texas' first wildlife veterinarian. As I tell Clay Brewer and Mitch Lockwood, who led the effort to hire Bob, that in our 125-year history of this department, I have to think that Dr. Bob Dittmar has to be one of our top 5 hires that we ever had. And he was quiet and steady and deeply respected and deeply revered across the state because of his knowledge and his counsel and his wisdom and his patience. And he loved bighorn sheep. And he was 2 weeks away from his retirement. And he came out to work on a project that was of great importance to him as he helped us sort through this issue of disease-related concerns and transmission from aoudads to our native bighorns. And we miss them all dearly. They were fathers and husbands. They were sons and brothers. They were cousins. They were nephews. And for our team, they were colleagues. and they were friends. And they were damn fine friends. And if you find a silver lining in all of it, I'll tell you this: when they passed away, the outpouring across the state was really nothing short of extraordinary, from all quarters, all levels, all corners. And sure, there were people that knew these men and just how fine they were. But what was so interesting about it, which was candidly like a artesian well, I have to tell you, or how many who didn't know them, but who took incredible pride at the work that they did, that recognized that these men worked for something and on behalf of something that was bigger than them. Something as noble as putting bighorn sheep back onto the mountain, working to restore and protect our wild things. People that saw themselves and their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations for their home ground and the work of those men and people like them. It was incredibly, incredibly gratifying and also comforting just to know that their death was not in vain. And I share that not to invoke any more sadness, and it obviously does for me and others that knew them and knew these men well, but to simply remind us all that the silent majority cares deeply about what you do. You may never hear from them. You may never know that they're out there, but they are so proud of the fact that you're in the arena and that every day you're working to make our home ground better by helping to restore our wildlife, bring back these majestic native bighorn that I think are the icon species of wildlife for the desert Southwest, a hallmark of our North American model of conservation. And there are people that may not say a word. You don't know who they are, but they're out there, and they're out there aplenty. And they came out in force to express their sympathies for these fine men. Those men died helping to protect and put sheep back on the mountain. They left their hearts there, they left their souls there, and they left their earthly spirits in those same mountains with those same sheep. And we'll forever grieve them, and we'll forever be grateful for them. Troy, Clay, I can say this unambiguously and with crystalline clarity about all three of them. They would have hated to be on a 2-day Zoom call. What they would have loved is being with all of you and huddling up in a corner, sharing war stories, hearing about what you were working on, talking about what they were working on. They would have loved to kick the rocks out in their favorite landscape and show you places where the sheep were and where they wished they were, or where they saw this or that, and showing you the part of Texas that meant the world to them and to us. And I can also say, I think with unfettered confidence, that they would have been keenly interested to talk about the subject at hand, the past and present and future threats of disease and exotic ungulates and a change in mindset. They wanted to share their perspective on this, and they've certainly would have wanted to hear yours. As we know, and certainly in our state, this is a very salient topic. It's undoubtedly also a very provocative one as we think about what I'll call the aoudad conundrum. And as we confront the messy and escapable realities of an exotic ungulate that is just absolutely exploded, both in numbers and in some quarters in popularity right before our very eyes. I suspect Froy and others will spend some time this afternoon talking a whole lot more about this topic, but the history of audads in Texas includes some kind of inconvenient facts for our department, not the least of which is that by all accounts, it was really our department that first put aoudad into the wild and free range environments up in Palo Duro Canyon in Texas Panhandle, outside of the bighorn sheep range, but in an effort to help provide game animals and hunting opportunities and economic opportunities for ranchers that were struggling with the declines in mule deer and white-tailed deer in that part of the world. That introduction, of course, in subsequent decades was followed by a litany of private introductions of aoudads of unknown numbers and quantities, which has resulted in what we see today is a huge proliferation of aoudads out in habitats in the Western Hill Country and the Trans-Pecos, including in some of our most prominent and best bighorn sheep habitat in West Texas. Fair to say that all of those introductions, I think, were made with the best of intentions, or at least the absence of bad ones. But today, we're certainly seeing how the chickens have come home to roost when we think about the potential conflicts that we have to manage through on this landscape. As Froy and my colleagues in the Trans-Pecos will tell you, in parts of sheep country in West Texas, the numbers are staggering. And not uncommon for Froy and others to fly a sheep survey and see thousands of sheep on a mountain, and arguably more than what exists in their wild native habitats in the rugged landscapes of North Africa. And you spend any time in West Texas and you'll see herds of 50, 75, 100, 150 just shimmering across the mountain. And it certainly doesn't take a trained range scientist to ascertain that the impacts on the range conditions and wildlife habitat in those fragile desert, mountain, shallow soil communities are likely to be significant and candidly not fully understood or known for long periods of time. More recently, our team, with their disease monitoring and surveillance, has discovered something even more insidious, and that is the fact that free-range aoudad can carry the dreaded MOVI, that causative agent that results in the reproductive diseases that have plagued dozens of sheep herds across the range, in which everybody in this call has likely forgotten more about than I know, but is certainly a huge source of concern to us as we think about, again, what to do with the aoudad conundrum. And with die-offs in Texas in the last couple of years in some of our sheep herds, something that we have been very fortunate to avoid over the last few decades, the subject of aoudads as a vector has become a very hot and salient and provocative topic for us as we look into that. What to do about the aoudad conundrum is not quite as easy, and in fact is a fairly messy one as we deal with this exotic chapter on and in the sheep frontier. And as we work in a landscape that I think most of you know is largely defined by private lands. We've got a few wildlife management areas, a couple of state parks, and a national park or two where we have sheep, but most of our habitat is on private lands. And our ability to successfully put native bighorns back on the mountain is absolutely and unequivocally dependent upon the trust and support and confidence of our landowner and rancher partners who support that work. And within that landscape, with the proliferation of aoudads have become both loved and loathed by landowners and sportsmen alike. And so it's within that dichotomy that we have to work, as in the last 5 to 10 years, the interest of hunters of chasing what they'll call a poor man's bighorn in the hopes of finding the unicorn 40-inch aoudad ram made famous by Jim Shockey will cause them to pay landowners and ranchers, $5,000, $7,000, $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 for the chance to spend some time in that landscape to chase one of those rams. And interestingly, this dichotomy, this tension, this conundrum was incredibly eloquently and well articulated in a popular article in a magazine no less than the Atlantic, Northeastern-based kind of highbrowed publication that some of you may know has its roots back in its original editors, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Harriet Beecher Stowe, but a magazine that's more known for its focus on politics and culture and social related issues of the day, the kinds of things that our parents tell us we have to avoid at the dinner table. And so it was interesting to find featured in that magazine a story about the Aoudad conundrum entitled, interestingly and provocatively, Texas Can't Quit the Aoudad. And the story was framed largely through the lens of two longtime individuals from ranching families in West Texas, both of whom are partners, or their families are partners with the department and have been in sheep restoration for many, many years. One who's happy to shoot every Aoudad that he ever sees and get rid of them all, and another one who makes his living off of them. And for those of you who, which is all of you on this call, who work at this messy intersection of biology and stewardship and management and science and politics and social and cultural related points of intersection, will be not surprised in the least to find that caught twixt and between was the representation of our very own Froilan Hernandez, the Parks and Wildlife biologist, between that push and pull, trying to navigate between the competing and sometimes conflicting interest partner landowners who have fairly divergent views about what should or could be done about the Aoudads and what their rightful place or not is on a landscape that we as a department obviously prefer to see occupied by our native bighorns. In 1963, this very council passed a resolution opposing the introduction of exotic ungulates without thorough environmental analysis. And certainly 60 years later, it's hard to argue with the prescience and wisdom of that proclamation and declaration. And while undoubtedly it's way too late for us to put the proverbial Aoudad genie back into the bottle, it's not too late. In fact, it's imperative. We have an obligation to understand the environmental impacts of this naturalized citizen on our landscape and what the impacts are to our native wildlife, and particularly our bighorn sheep. And so I'm very pleased that as part of the session, and particularly this afternoon, there will be a focus on that very subject as scientists with universities and grad students and biologists with the department will talk about the issues of the interspecific competition for food and space and water and shelter on the landscape, and the question about the disease transmissibility, and particularly the question of MOVI, and will it or won't it cause the dreaded pathogen spillover into some population that remains on the landscape and affects our vulnerable landscapes. And caught twixt in between, of course, will be the department and working and navigating through the many social and cultural landmines of our private landowner partners with their different and sometimes divergent views about Aoudads and their place on the mountains. You can rest assured that our focus will always be on putting the native bighorns back on the mountains and working with landowners with then their constraints and their value constructs about how we accomplish that. And that's not going to look the same for every landowner partner out in West Texas. And we have to acknowledge that inescapable reality of the situation in the hands that we have been dealt. But I'm proud of our team for the work that they have done, and I'm very proud of the work that I know they will do to help us sort through this and work through the Aoudad conundrum and how we deal with the latest challenge in sheep country. And I also take great confidence and great strength and spirit knowing that Bob and Dewey and Brandon are up above watching us, cheering us on, hoping that we'll fulfill their dreams and hopes for the sheep up on the mountain. I'm very grateful to everybody on this call for what you do for our wild things and wild places. And I'm very proud to be on your team. Thanks for letting me join you. God bless you. And I wish we were welcome you to Texas in person, but we hope to see you here soon. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Floyd. Thank you, Clay.